The mountain man's gold, the morning mist clung to the valley like a whispered secret, curling around the pine trees and settling into the hollows where wildflowers bloomed in defiant splashes of color. Ezra Blackwood stood at the edge of his cabin's porch, watching the sun break through the clouds with the patience of a man who had learned to read the sky like scripture. His hands, scarred and weathered from years of working the mountain, wrapped around a tin cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The silence up here was different from the silence in town. It was alive, breathing with the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. This was his sanctuary, his refuge from a world that had never quite fit him right. At 35, Ezra had the build of a man carved from the very mountains he called home. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, and his beard grew thick and full, streaked with early silver that caught the morning light. His blue eyes held the kind of depth that came from seeing too much and saying too little. The fur-lined coat he wore had been his father's, and before that, his grandfather's, a family heirloom that smelled of wood smoke and pine sap. He had been alone on this mountain for 8 years now. Ever since Sarah died, the cabin that had once echoed with her laughter now held only the sound of his own footsteps and the crackling of the fire he kept burning through the long winter nights. The gold he pulled from the mountain's secret places had made him wealthy by any standard, but wealth meant little when you had no one to share it with. The leather satchel hanging by his door held more gold than most men would see in a lifetime. Nuggets the size of walnuts, flakes that caught the light like fallen stars, and dust so fine it seemed to glow with its own inner fire. It was beautiful, in its way. But beauty, Ezra had learned, was a cold comfort when the nights grew long, and the wind howled through the passes. This morning was different, though. This morning he was going to town. The decision had been building in him for weeks, like pressure in a kettle. The loneliness had weight to it now, pressing against his chest until he could barely breathe. He needed something, someone, not just for the winter that was coming, but for all the winters after that. Ezra had heard the stories, of course. Men in mining camps and frontier towns who paid for companionship, who made arrangements that suited both parties involved. It wasn't love, but it wasn't nothing either. And maybe, after 8 years of nothing, that would be enough. He finished his cold coffee in one bitter swallow and went inside to prepare for the journey down the mountain. The town of Cedar Falls sprawled along the banks of a swift-running river, its buildings weathered gray by sun and storm. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where the saloon stayed open late and the church bells rang early, where fortunes were made and lost on the turn of a card or the strike of a pickaxe. Ezra rode in on his black stallion, midnight drawing looks from the folks on the wooden sidewalks. He cut an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with that wild hair and the kind of stillness that suggested he was comfortable with violence if it came to that. But there was something else in his bearing too, a gentleness around the edges that spoke of a man who had known love and lost it. He tied Midnight to the hitching post outside the Broken Wheel Saloon and stepped through the batwing doors into the dim, smoky interior. The conversations quieted as he entered, then resumed at a lower volume. Ezra was known here, respected but not quite trusted. Mountain men were a breed apart, and folks in town never knew quite what to make of them. The bartender, a thin man, named Murphy with arms like knotted rope, nodded in his direction. Ezra, been a while it has. Ezra approached the bar, his boots heavy on the sawdust-covered floor. I'm looking for someone. Murphy raised an eyebrow. Someone specific. Not specific, but someone ... permanent. Understanding dawned in Murphy's eyes. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. There's a man you might want to talk to. Goes by Silas Crane. He arranges things for folks like yourself. Folks with particular needs. Ezra nodded slowly. He had heard of Crane, a middleman who dealt in all manner of transactions, legal and otherwise. Not the kind of man you'd want to owe money to, but reliable in his own way. Where would I find him? Back room at the Silver Dollar. But Ezra ... Murphy's expression grew serious. Be careful what you wish for. Some bargains come with strings. You can't see until they're already tied around your neck. Ezra left a coin on the bar and walked out into the bright afternoon sunshine. The Silver Dollar was 3 blocks down, past the general store and the blacksmith shop. In the part of town where the buildings leaned a little too close together and the shadows lingered a little too long. The saloon was smaller than the Broken Wheel, shabbier with the kind of atmosphere that suggested most of its patrons preferred their business conducted in whispers. Ezra found Silas Crane in a corner booth, a thin man with pale eyes and hands that never seemed to stay still. Mr. Blackwood, Crane said before Ezra had even introduced himself. I've been expecting you. Ezra slid into the booth across from him. studying the man's face. Have you now? Word travels fast in a town this size. You're looking for a companion. Someone to share that big empty cabin of yours. Crane smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I may have just what you need. I'm listening. Crane leaned forward conspiratorially. There's a young woman named of Isabella. Let's say she's found herself in a difficult situation. Her father died owing money to some very serious people, and she needs to disappear for a while. Permanently, if you catch my meaning. Ezra's jaw tightened. What kind of money? The kind that gets people killed if it's not paid back. But here's the thing, she's willing to enter into an arrangement with a man of means. Someone who can pay her father's debt and provide her with protection. In exchange, she becomes his wife, his companion, his whatever he needs her to be. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Ezra thought of his empty cabin, of the silence that pressed against him like a living thing. What's the debt? Crane named a figure that would have been staggering to most men. To Ezra, it represented perhaps a quarter of what he had hidden in various caches around his property. He had been pulling gold from the mountain for years, and the mountain had been generous. And she's agreeable to this arrangement. More than agreeable, grateful. The alternative for her is ... Crane shrugged. Well, there is no alternative. Not a pleasant one, anyway. Ezra sat back in the booth, his mind racing. This wasn't what he had come to town looking for. He had imagined something simpler, cleaner. A business arrangement, perhaps. But one based on mutual benefit rather than desperation. But then again, what was his own presence here if not a form of desperation? I'd want to meet her first, he said finally. Crane's smile widened. I was hoping you'd say that. She's staying at the boarding house on Elm Street, room 7. But Ezra, the man's voice dropped to a whisper, don't wait too long to make your decision. Word is, the people her father owed money to are getting impatient. They'll be coming for her soon, and when they do, well, let's just say they're not the marrying type. The boarding house on Elm Street was a 2-story building with peeling paint and a front porch that sagged under the weight of too many harsh winters. Ezra climbed the narrow stairs to the 2nd floor, his heart beating harder than it had any right to. What was he doing here? What kind of man bought a woman like a sack of grain at the general store? But then he thought of Sarah, of how she had come to him not through purchase or arrangement but through love. She had chosen him freely, joyfully, and for 5 beautiful years they had built a life together on the mountain. When the fever took her, it had taken the best part of him too. Maybe this was different. Maybe this was a chance to save someone. To give them both something they needed. He knocked on the door of room 7. Come in. A voice called from inside. It was soft, musical, with just a hint of an accent he couldn't quite place. Ezra opened the door and stepped into a small, simply furnished room. A young woman sat by the window, her profile lit by the afternoon sun streaming through the glass. When she turned to look at him, his breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful, but not in the way Sarah had been. Where Sarah had been golden and warm, this woman was dark and mysterious. Her hair was the color of rich earth, and her eyes were the deep green of forest shadows. She wore a simple dress of brown wool, but she carried herself with a grace that spoke of better circumstances, of a life that had once held more promise. You must be Mr. Blackwood, she said, rising from her chair. I'm Isabella Moreau. Her voice carried a slight French accent, soft around the edges like velvet. Ezra found himself removing his hat without thinking. Something his mother had drilled into him as a boy. Miss Moreau. He nodded respectfully. I understand you're in some difficulty. A shadow passed across her face. That's one way to put it. Yes. Mr. Crane explained the situation. He did. Ezra moved closer to the window, studying her face in the light. There was strength there, and intelligence, but also a weariness that reminded him of his own reflection in the mirror. Your father's debt. $15,000, she said quietly. Owed to men who don't forgive or forget. They gave him 6 months to pay it back. He died 4 months into that time, and the debt, well, it passed to me. What did he owe money for? Isabella looked out the window, her hands clasped in front of her. Papa was a gambler, a dreamer. He believed he could strike it rich in the goldfields, but instead of finding gold, he found cards and whiskey, and men who were very good at taking advantage of dreamers. There was pain in her voice, but also resignation. This was a woman who had learned to accept the cruelties of life without letting them destroy her entirely. And you're willing to marry me to escape this debt? She turned back to him, and he saw something unexpected in her eyes. Not desperation, exactly, but a kind of determined hope. Mr. Blackwood, I don't know you. I don't know if you're a good man or a bad one, if you're kind or cruel, gentle or harsh. But I know that the men who are coming for me are definitely cruel, definitely harsh. So yes, I'm willing to take my chances with you." There was honesty in her words that cut through him like a blade. She wasn't pretending to love him, wasn't trying to manipulate him with false affection. She was simply laying out the facts as she saw them, asking him to make a choice based on truth rather than illusion. "I live on a mountain," he said after a long moment. "It's isolated, quiet. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and in winter we might not see another soul for months at a time. It's not an easy life. Is it a safe life? Yes. Then it's easier than what I'm facing here." Ezra studied her face, looking for signs of deception or desperation that might complicate things later. But all he saw was a woman who had run out of options and was trying to make the best of an impossible situation. "If I agree to this," he said carefully, "what would you expect from me? What would this marriage mean to you?" Isabella considered the question for a long moment. "I would expect protection, a roof over my head, food to eat. In return, I would keep your house, cook your meals, tend to whatever needs tending. As for the rest," she paused, color rising in her cheeks, "I understand that marriage involves certain obligations. I'm prepared to fulfill those obligations, if that's what you require." The clinical way she spoke about intimacy made something twist in Ezra's chest. This wasn't how it should be. He knew that. Marriage should be about love, about choosing to build a life with someone because you couldn't imagine building it with anyone else. But then again, Sarah was gone. Love was a luxury he might never be able to afford again, and if this arrangement could save Isabella's life while filling the empty spaces in his own. "I don't require anything," he said quietly. "If we do this, if we enter into this marriage, it will be on your terms as much as mine. You'll be safe, and you'll be free to choose what kind of life we build together." Something shifted in her expression, a softening around the eyes that suggested his words had surprised her. "That's not what I expected to hear." "What did you expect? A man who would buy a wife is usually buying her for specific reasons. I thought you would have conditions, requirements." Ezra moved to the other chair in the room and sat down, suddenly feeling tired. "I had a wife once, a real wife who chose me freely and loved me completely. She died 8 years ago, and I've been alone ever since. The loneliness it's like a sickness, eating away at you from the inside. I thought maybe if I found someone to share the cabin with, it might hurt less." He looked at her directly, letting her see the honesty in his eyes. "But I won't force anything on you that you don't want to give. You're not property to be bought, no matter what the circumstances. You're a person, with your own thoughts and feelings and choices. If we do this, we'll figure out the rest as we go." Isabella sat back down by the window, her gaze thoughtful. "You really loved her, your first wife, Sarah." Her name was Sarah, and yes, I loved her more than I thought it was possible to love another person. Do you think it's possible to love someone again after losing someone like that?" The question caught him off guard. He had been asking himself the same thing for years, and he still didn't have an answer. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I think maybe there are different kinds of love. Maybe the love I had with Sarah was one kind, and if I'm lucky enough to find love again, it'll be a different kind. Not better or worse, just different." Isabella nodded slowly. "In France, where my grandmother came from, there were arranged marriages all the time. Most of them started with nothing more than mutual respect and grew into something deeper over time. Maybe that's enough to begin with. Respect. Maybe it is." They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Isabella spoke. "If I agreed to this, when would we when would it happen?" "As soon as possible. If Crane is right about those men coming for you, we don't have time to waste. We could be married tomorrow, leave town the same day, and your mountain. What's it like there?" Ezra's expression softened as he thought about home. "Beautiful, wild. The cabin sits in a valley surrounded by peaks that catch the snow and hold it all winter long. There's a stream that runs year-round, and in summer the meadows are full of wildflowers. You can see for 50 miles in every direction. And at night, the stars are so bright and close you feel like you could reach up and pluck them from the sky. It sounds peaceful. It is, sometimes almost too peaceful, but it's a good place to heal, a good place to start over." Isabella stood and walked to the window again, looking out at the dusty street below. "Mr. Blackwood, if I say yes to this, I need you to know something. I'm not just agreeing because I have no choice. I'm agreeing because I think maybe we could help each other. You need someone to share your mountain with, and I need somewhere to belong. Maybe that's enough to build something good on. Ezra felt something ease in his chest, a tension he hadn't even realized he was carrying. I'd like that. She turned back to him, and for the first time since he'd entered the room, she smiled. It was a small smile, tentative, but it transformed her entire face. Then yes, Mr. Blackwood, I'll marry you. The wedding took place the next morning in the small church at the edge of town. The pastor, a kindly man named Reverend Matthews, asked no questions about the speed of the arrangement or the fact that the bride and groom barely knew each other. He had seen enough frontier weddings to know that survival often took precedence over romance. Isabella wore a simple blue dress that she had bought with the last of her money. Ezra had offered to buy her something finer, but she had declined, saying she wanted to save his resources for the journey ahead. Her hair was pinned up in a neat chignon, and she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers that the pastor's wife had hastily gathered from the church garden. There were no guests except for Murphy from the Broken Wheel, who had agreed to serve. As a witness, Silas Crane was notably absent. He had collected his fee for arranging the match and disappeared before dawn, probably to avoid any uncomfortable questions about the bride's true circumstances. During the ceremony, Ezra found himself studying Isabella's profile as she repeated her vows. There was something almost ethereal about her in the morning light streaming through the church windows, as if she was more spirit than flesh. But when she turned to look at him as they exchanged rings, simple gold bands he had hastily purchased from the town's only jewelry merchant, her eyes were very human, very real. You may kiss the bride, Reverend Matthews said with a gentle smile. Ezra hesitated for a moment, unsure of the boundaries they had established. But Isabella rose up on her toes and pressed a soft, brief kiss to his lips. It was chaste, respectful, but there was warmth in it that surprised them both. Mrs. Blackwood, she said quietly, trying out the name. Isabella Blackwood, he replied, and something about the way her name sounded with his surname made his chest tight. They signed the marriage certificate with hands that trembled slightly, his from nerves, hers from the weight of the moment. This was it. She was no longer Isabella Moreau, the gambling man's daughter with a price on her head. She was Isabella Blackwood, wife to a mountain man, protected by his name and his strength. After the ceremony, they went to the bank where Ezra withdrew $15,000 in gold and cash. The transaction drew stares from the other customers. It was more money than most of them would see in a lifetime, but Ezra handed it over to the bank president with instructions to ensure it reached the men Isabella's father had owed money to, along with a message that the debt was paid in full and the matter was closed. That's it, Isabella asked as they walked out of the bank. It's over, Ezra confirmed. You're free. She stopped walking and turned to look at him, tears gathering in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me. We're married now. Your problems are my problems, and my problems are yours. That's how it works. Isabella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and nodded. Then let's go home. The journey up the mountain took the better part of the day. Isabella rode behind. Ezra on midnight, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance as they navigated the narrow trails that wound between towering pines and granite outcroppings. She had never been this high up before, and the air grew thinner and colder as they climbed. But there was beauty here that took her breath away. Wildflower meadows spread out like colorful carpets, and waterfalls cascaded down rocky cliffs in sheets of silver. Hawks circled overhead, and once they saw a family of deer grazing in a clearing, their heads lifting alertly as the horse and riders passed. It's magnificent, Isabella said, her voice carried away by the wind. I had no idea places like this existed. Ezra smiled, pleased by her reaction. Wait until you see the cabin. As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, they crested a ridge and Isabella gasped. Below them lay a valley that seemed carved from a fairy tale, a perfect bowl of green meadows surrounded by snow-capped mountains, with a crystal-clear stream meandering through the middle. And there, nestled against a grove of aspens whose leaves shimmered gold in the fading light, stood a log cabin that looked like something from a dream. It was larger than she had expected, with a wide front porch and windows that caught the sunset like jewels. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and she realized that Ezra must have banked the fire carefully before leaving, ensuring they would return to warmth. Home, he said simply, and the word held more meaning than any speech. They rode down into the valley as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where she was supposed to be. It was strange, considering she had known this man for less than 2 days and was now his wife. living in a place so remote that it might as well have been on the moon. But as Ezra helped her down from the horse and she looked up at the cabin that was now her home, she felt the first stirrings of something that might, someday, grow into happiness. The inside of the cabin was even more impressive than the outside. The main room was spacious and warm, with log walls that gleamed golden in the firelight and furniture that was clearly handmade but beautifully crafted. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and comfortable chairs were arranged around it. The kitchen was well appointed with modern conveniences that must have cost a fortune to transport up the mountain. But it was the personal touches that caught Isabella's attention: a woman's shawl draped over one of the chairs, books on the shelves that spoke of refined tastes, a piano in the corner that was obviously well loved and carefully maintained. "Sarah's things," Ezra said quietly, noticing her gaze. "I couldn't bring myself to put them away." Isabella nodded, understanding. She had good taste. She did. She made this place into a real home. He paused, looking around the room as if seeing it through her eyes. "I know it must be strange for you, being surrounded by reminders of another woman." "Not strange," Isabella said thoughtfully. "Comforting, in a way. It tells me you're a man who honors love, who doesn't forget the people who matter to you. That's a good quality in a husband." Ezra looked at her with surprise and something that might have been gratitude. "I was worried you might want me to change things, put her belongings away. This was her home too. I wouldn't want to erase that." Isabella moved to the piano and touched the keys gently. "Did she play?" "Every evening after supper." She said music made the cabin feel less isolated. "Do you play?" "No. I tried to learn, for her sake, but I don't have the touch for it." Isabella sat on the piano bench and played a few soft chords. The sound filled the cabin with warmth and melody, and she saw Ezra's expression change, saw something that had been sleeping in his face wake up and take notice. "You play beautifully. My mother insisted on lessons. She said a lady should always have accomplishments." Isabella's smile was rueful. "I never thought piano playing would be particularly useful on a mountain." "Everything is useful, in its way, music most of all." She played a little longer, a gentle melody that seemed to settle into the cabin's bones and make itself at home. When she finally stopped, the silence that followed was different from the silence she had heard before, not empty, but full of possibility. "I should show you the rest of the house," Ezra said. "Help you get settled." He led her through the cabin, pointing out the pantry stocked with preserved foods, the bedroom that had clearly been his alone for many years, the smaller room that could serve as her private space if she wanted it. Everything was clean and well maintained, but there was a hollowness to it, as if the house had been waiting for something to bring it back to life. "The bedroom, Isabella began, then stopped, color rising in her cheeks. "Has 2 beds," Ezra finished gently. "I moved a second one in yesterday, before the wedding. I meant what I said about not forcing anything on you. We can take things as slowly as you need to." The relief in her expression was unmistakable. "Thank you. I know that must sound foolish, considering we're married, but you don't know me yet, and physical intimacy should come from choice, not obligation. We have time, Isabella, all the time in the world." She looked at him then with something approaching wonder. "You really mean that?" "I do." That night, they ate a simple supper of bread and preserved meat and talked quietly by the fire. Isabella told him about her life in Sacramento, about her father's dreams and failures, about the small jobs she had taken to try to keep them afloat. Ezra told her about the mountain, about the gold he found in secret places, about the solitude that had been both blessing and curse. When it came time for bed, they retired to their respective sides of the bedroom with a politeness that was almost formal, but there was comfort in the shared space, and the sound of another person breathing in the darkness, in the knowledge that neither of them was alone anymore. Isabella lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind in the trees and the distant call of an owl. She thought about the strange turns her life had taken, how a catastrophe had somehow led her to this place of unexpected peace. She didn't love Ezra, not yet, but she could see how she might learn to. There was kindness in him, and strength, and a depth of character that spoke of a man who could be trusted. That was more than she had dared to hope for when she walked into this arrangement. It was enough to build on. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised them both with its naturalness. Isabella proved to be an excellent housekeeper and cook, transforming their simple meals into feasts that filled the cabin with delicious aromas. She tended a small garden that Sarah had planted years before, coaxing vegetables and herbs from the mountain soil with patient care. Ezra, in turn, showed her the secrets of the mountain, where the best fishing spots were hidden, which plants could be used for medicine, how to read the weather and the color of the sky. He was patient with her questions and generous with his knowledge, treating her like a partner rather than a possession. They began to develop small rituals that bound them together. Morning coffee shared on the porch while they watched the sunrise paint the peaks pink and gold. Evening walks along the stream that ran through their valley. Music after supper, with Isabella playing the piano while Ezra whittled or read by the fire. But it was the day Isabella discovered Sarah's journals that their relationship took its first real step forward. She had been cleaning the bedroom, dusting the shelves and organizing books, when she found them tucked away in a wooden box under the window. 3 leather-bound volumes filled with delicate handwriting and pressed flowers. She brought them to Ezra with trembling hands, afraid she had intruded on something sacred. "I found these while cleaning," she said. "I didn't read them. I wouldn't do that without your permission." Ezra took the journals reverently, his fingers tracing the worn leather covers. "I didn't even know she kept journals," he said quietly. "She never mentioned them. Perhaps they were private thoughts, things she needed to work through on paper." He looked at the journals for a long moment, then held them out to her. Would you read them to me? I think I'd like to hear her voice again, but I'm not sure I can handle reading her words myself." It was an incredibly intimate request, and Isabella felt the weight of trust it represented. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." They sat together by the fire that evening, Isabella reading aloud from the first journal while Ezra listened with his eyes closed. Sarah's voice came alive through her words, warm, intelligent, deeply in love with her husband and their life. Together, she wrote about small daily moments, about the beauty of the mountain, about dreams for the future that would never come to pass. But she also wrote about deeper things, about the loneliness she sometimes felt when Ezra was away prospecting, about her fears that she might not be strong enough for mountain life, about the desperate desire for children that had never been fulfilled. "She was lonely too," Isabella said softly during a pause. "Even with you here, she felt isolated sometimes." "I never knew," Ezra said, opening his eyes. "She never said anything. She loved you too much to burden you with her fears. But they were real, these feelings. It must have been difficult for her, being the only woman for miles, with no female friends to talk to." Ezra was quiet for a long time, processing this new understanding of his late wife. "I failed her in some ways. I was so focused on providing for her, on building our life here, that I didn't see what she really needed." Ezra was quiet for a long time, processing this new understanding of his late wife. "I failed her in some ways. I was so focused on providing for her, on building our life here, that I didn't see what she really needed." "You didn't fail her," Isabella said firmly. "She was happy, Ezra. That comes through in every word she wrote. But happiness doesn't mean the absence of struggle or loneliness. It just means the struggle is worth it." She continued reading, and they both began to understand Sarah in a new way, not as a perfect memory, but as a complex woman who had chosen love despite its challenges. The journals revealed something else too. In the final entries, written just weeks before her death, Sarah had written about her hopes for Ezra's future. "If something happens to me," Isabella read aloud, her voice catching slightly, "I want Ezra to find love again. I want him to fill this cabin with laughter and music, and maybe someday with children. He has too much love in him to spend it all on memories of me. I hope he finds someone who can appreciate the gift he is, someone who can love the mountain the way I do, someone who can give him the things I couldn't." The silence that followed was profound. Isabella closed the journal and set it aside, unsure what to say. Ezra sat with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking slightly. "She would have liked you," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "She would have been glad to know you were here." "I hope so," Isabella whispered. "I hope she would understand that I'm not trying to replace her. I could never do that." "You're not replacing her," Ezra said, looking up at her with eyes that held a new clarity. "You're something different, something new. And maybe that's exactly what we both need." That night, for the first time since their wedding, they talked late into the evening, really talked, about their fears and hopes and the strange circumstances that had brought them together. When they finally went to bed, there was a new understanding between them, a foundation of trust that felt strong enough to build on. The first snow came early that year, dusting the peaks with white while the valley still blazed with autumn colors. Isabella had never experienced a mountain winter, and Ezra spent days preparing her for what was to come, showing her how to bank the fires so they would burn all night, how to preserve food for the long months when they would be cut off from town, how to read the signs that warned of dangerous storms. "Are you afraid?" he asked one evening as they watched the snow fall outside the windows. "A little," she admitted. "It's so isolated up here. What if something happens? What if you get hurt, or I get sick?" I've been through 8 winters alone, Ezra said. I know how to take care of both of us, and we have supplies for months. Plus the gold, if we need to trade for anything, we'll be fine. But there was something else in her question, something deeper than practical concerns. The approaching winter meant they would be truly alone together for months, with no outside distractions or escape routes. It would test whatever they were building between them. Ezra, she said quietly, can I ask you something? Anything? Do you think of me as your wife? Really? I mean, or am I just, someone who lives in your house? The question caught him off guard, but he didn't hesitate with his answer. You're my wife, Isabella, in every way that matters to me, even though we haven't. Even though our marriage ISN single quotes T. Physical intimacy isn't what makes a marriage, he said gently. Commitment does. Caring for each other does. Choosing to build a life together does. We've been doing all of those things. She moved closer to him on the couch where they sat watching the fire. I've been thinking about us, about what we could be to each other. His pulse quickened, but he kept his voice steady. What have you been thinking? That maybe it's time to stop being so careful with each other. So polite. Maybe it's time to see what happens when we let ourselves be, closer. The word hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Ezra searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt or obligation. Are you sure? There's no pressure. Isabella, no expectations. I know, she said. That's why I'm sure, because you've given me the space to choose, and now I'm choosing you. She leaned forward and kissed him, and this time it wasn't the chaste kiss they had shared at their wedding. This was a real kiss, full of warmth and promise and the first stirrings of genuine desire. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Isabella, Ezra whispered, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. Yes, she said. Yes to all of it. Yes,